Grace and peace to you in the name of God the Creator, Christ the Redeemer, and the Spirit who sustains us. Amen. Pastor Sammy reminded you all last week that we don't hear from or about the women in the Bible nearly often enough. Esther is one of the women who doesn't get a whole lot of time. She shared in her sermon last week that the book of Esther is not literally true, not ripped from the Persian headlines true. Instead, it's a story somewhere in the realm of myth or satire, but it still has important truths to tell us. And it has the power to make us ask questions about our faith and about the role that faith plays in our daily lives, about who we listen to and why, and about when we speak up, when we see injustices occurring, and when we choose to remain silent. Some of you know that in addition to being the pastor at All Saints in Blue Springs, I also work at Mosaic here in St. Joe. We have a renewed emphasis over the last few years on a culture of safety. One of the first tenets of a culture of safety is if you see something, say something. If you see something, anything out of the ordinary, concerning, or potentially dangerous, a culture of safety empowers you to speak up, no matter who you are, because that protects everyone and helps encourage the next person who sees something to speak up. Of course, this works best with relational leaders who share power willingly, rather than leaders who have a hierarchical, top-down mentality. For people of faith, safety culture feels very akin to our commitment to live our faith publicly in terms of how we respond to conflicts that we're faced with. This is true on the global scale when faced with horrific events like apartheid or the Holocaust, but also much more locally when we have to decide how to respond to crises like hunger in our communities or people we know in the sandwich generation who we see caring for both ailing parents and children on their own with too few resources. Because the story of Esther is told in a narrative form, which we've broken up into 4 sections, let me start with a brief recap of last week. After 187 days of drunken partying, King Ahasuerus of Persia sent his 7 eunuchs to summon Queen Vashti, his wife, to appear at his party wearing only her crown so he could show off her beauty. When she refused, and rightly so, he got mad at her and banished her. Then he held a contest to replace her, choosing among all of the beautiful young women in Persia. Ultimately, the winner was Esther, the niece of Mordecai, who worked in the palace. Ahasuerus was taken with her beauty and threw another party to celebrate her accession as queen. However, at her uncle's bidding, she kept her family's Jewish identity a secret. And that's where our story picks up today. Mordecai overhears a plot to kill the king by 2 of his eunuchs, and he reports it to Esther, who reports it to the king. When you see something, say something, right? As a result of this, both of these men are hung, and someone else gets promoted. And then we hear the story of Mordecai refusing to bow down to Haman, and Haman getting mad about it and threatening revenge not just against Mordecai, but against all the Jews living in Persia. We don't know why until we get into the backstory, which is where things get really interesting. Now, there may have been a religious component to Mordecai's refusal, but this all really boils down to a family feud. Mordecai is the descendant of Saul, the first king of Israel, whom God regretted making king when God instructed him to kill all the Amalekites, and he killed them all except Agag, Haman's ancestor. There is an intractable enmity there, which Ahasuerus unknowingly makes worse when he promotes Haman, apparently for Mordecai's good deed. Now it takes months for the palace servants to break down and tell Haman that Mordecai is actually Jewish. Months before Haman connects Mordecai with this ancient family feud he has inherited. But then he decides that the only possible defense is an over-the-top offense. He plots revenge on a genocidal level. And he's clever about it. He doesn't tell the king what the offense is, and he exaggerates who has committed it, leading Ahasuerus to believe that the entire Jewish people are guilty of some monstrous breaking of the rules that means they are deserving of death. Word quickly spreads throughout the kingdom of Persia, but it does not spread at all throughout the palace. After all, the king has no idea what a minor infraction has condemned his Jewish subjects to death all on the same day. Otherwise, would he ever have agreed? We can hope not. Although we have seen by now that he is not a good leader, not a leader who shares powers, not a leader who encourages speaking up when something out of the ordinary or concerning happens. The decision to speak up appears to have cost Mordecai much, much more than he ever anticipated. Even under a hierarchical top-down leadership style like Ahasuerus practices, he could have expected not to be punished for reporting an attempted coup. But then when his archenemy was promoted in his place, somehow his decision to speak out and save the king's life threatens to cost him not only his own, but those of all his fellow Persian Jews. Esther hears about Mordecai publicly making a spectacle of himself in sackcloth and ashes, but she has no idea why. After all, she's stuck inside the same echo chamber that the king is. The only news that spreads inside the palace is what the king wants to hear or what his advisors think he wants to hear. This is the very opposite of a culture of safety. The very opposite of an environment that breeds trust and openness. But she finds a way to hear the truth from Mordecai about what's really going on, and she learns that not only is his life in danger, so is hers. Mordecai is asking her to take a huge risk, to even consider going to the king to plead for the lives of their people. After all, it's possible that Ahasuerus has forgotten about any family connection between her and Mordecai. It's possible that if she remains silent, he wouldn't make the connection right away that she must be Jewish too. Although, as Mordecai points out to her, someone would make this connection. Thankfully, she has been prepared by her God and by her uncle to face this crisis, and her faith sustains her. God has demonstrated over and over throughout the history of the Jewish people that God is not a top-down leader. Instead, God much prefers to put trust in God's chosen people, allowing them to shape their own destiny, to speak up and to act when something is out of the ordinary or concerning or potentially dangerous. And these are the stories of Esther's foremothers that she has probably grown up on. The stories of Moses' sister and mother, the story of Rahab, the story of Ruth and Naomi, the stories of Deborah and Jael, And so she is bold enough to say something, faithful enough to prepare herself through prayer and fasting, and reliant enough on her community to ask for support. As this week's reading ends in suspense, she and Mordecai, along with all the Jews in the capital city, prepare for her to confront this threat to their very existence. What do we do when we are faced with conflicts that threaten to derail us? Or when we see our neighbors, whether across the street or across the globe, who are dealing with crises that appear to be unraveling their lives? Do we speak up no matter the risk? Or do we stay silent? A friend of mine shared some wisdom this week from her own life in the midst of an ongoing crisis. Her goal each day, she said, is to do the next right thing. Sometimes the difficulty is in discerning what the next right thing is. And for that, we rely on God and on each other. Amen.